Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 16th Annual Women's Policy Leadership Institute. Thank you for joining us for our last panel of our program, What's at Stake at Indian Country? What's at Stake in Indian Country? An analysis on federal, state, and tribal policy. I'll be your moderator this evening. My government name is Danielle Vasquez, but everyone just calls me Danny. So feel free to just call me Danny. I use she, her pronouns. I am an organizer for Montana Women Vote. I'm also a Leo sun. So, do with what you want, okay. Anyways, the Women's Policy Leadership Institute is a program of Montana Women Vote. Montana Women Vote works statewide to engage low-income women and families, LGBTQ folks, Two-Spirit and non-binary folks, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and their allies in the democratic process as informed voters, policy advocates, and community leaders. We are grateful for our panelists who are going to share with us today about their work advocating for Indigenous rights on different policy levels. We hope that the information presented will inform your efforts in your own communities, and we look forward to staying connected with you as we work together to advocate advance policy that works for low-income folks in Montana. Before we get started, I'm just going to go over a few technical logistics. If you've been with us since the beginning of our program, you've probably heard this a lot, but for the people who have not, I'm just going to repeat it again. So this panel is webinar style, meaning you are able to unmute you won't be able to unmute yourself without permission. To request that you to be unmuted, you can click the microphone icon in the bottom left corner or press 6 if you're on the phone. You can also ask questions and talk with other participants using the chat or the Q&A functions, as well as the conference Slack workspace. The Q&A will typically be reviewed during the presentation and then again at the end of our agenda. You also have the option to turn the captions on or off and adjust the size of your captions by clicking the arrow key by the little CC button on the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions or have any technical difficulties anytime, you can put them in the chat, or you can also call our staff at 406-317-1505. We will also be recording today's session. So if you missed something, recordings will be provided on our website as well as our YouTube channel. And then we'll also provide any materials that we reference during the session. And at the end, we ask that you complete a short evaluation of the session to let us know your thoughts and how we can improve. And yeah, once you do that, you will be entered into a drawing to win a book written by our keynote speaker, Aubrey Gordon. The book is titled What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat. If you all were able to catch her workshop last week, you all know it was amazing. So it's a good book. I've heard good things. I have a copy of the book. I haven't read it yet. I will get to it. It's on my New Year's resolution list. So yeah, you fill out those evals because we do read them. So yeah, so we got through all that. So now just want to do kind of like another like a safety aside. So tonight we're going to be addressing an extremely important topic, and it might bring up feelings of guilt and animosity, and that's just how it is, but that doesn't mean that you can say really bad things. So with that, there's going to be absolutely no anti-Blackness, no anti-indigeneity, no bigotry of any kind. If in the event that does happen, you will be removed. So just putting that out there. So yeah, so our panel today is focuses on Indigenous issues in the framework of state, federal and tribal policy. And so before we get into that, you know, there's just some things that need to be acknowledged. You know, the land that we currently call Montana has a unique history with settler colonialism. And so those of you who are not Indigenous or Black must acknowledge that you are settlers on this land and that you and your families benefit every day from the past, current, and present and ongoing colonization and oppression of Indigenous people. We are also gathering in February, which is Black History Month, and we here at Montana Women Vote, as you all should too, recognize the invaluable and incomparable contributions of Black people every month, and take this month especially to lift up and highlight the leadership and excellence of Black people now and in the past. Montana has had many thriving Black communities whose history is often overlooked or purposefully erased. And yeah, and so on, you know, the topic of erasure, you know, that erasure of Black and Indigenous people and our histories is one of the main goals of settler colonialism. The violent and forced removal and erasure of Indigenous peoples was and is needed in order to take the land for use by settlers. So this state, this country, and the other countries on this continent would not and could not exist without their settler colonial foundations. So like I mentioned before, settler colonialism is not just a vicious thing of the past, but it exists as long as settlers are living on appropriated land and thus exists today. And I really just want y'all to sit with that for a while. And if you're white, really sit with that and you think about that and you just ask yourself how you can be a better ally. I don't know how that is, but you know, just keep that in mind. So I got through that. You have to acknowledge it. I think when talking about Indigenous issues, it is important you acknowledge the history for what it is. And yeah, so again, with this, you know, talking about Indigenous issues, I also want to touch on another concept, what that's relevant and necessary for this discussion, and that is tribal sovereignty. And so I'm actually going to put a poll up, and I'll just wait a few seconds. You know, so what is tribal sovereignty? Cool. I think hopefully everyone was able to answer that question. Unfortunately, hosts and panelists can't answer. I tried answering the last poll and I couldn't, which was like a bummer because I actually knew the answer. But yeah, so for everyone that said, I think it's D or A, B, C, D, E, all of the above, you were correct. And yeah, you know, congratulations, you know more than most Montana state legislators do. So yeah, nobody said it was a ban. I was like, maybe one. Okay, sorry, back on track. Sorry, I have a tendency to like derail stuff. I don't know, sometimes it's a good thing. But anyways, so back to our panel. So yeah, tribal sovereignty is a tribe's inherent right to govern themselves. And so I just wanted to share this quote from one of my readings back in undergrad. It's from the handbook on like federal Indian law. Yeah, it's by Felix Cohen. And it goes, from the earliest years of the Republic, the Indian tribes have been recognized as distinct, independent political communities, and as such qualified to exercise powers of self-government, not by virtue of any delegation of powers from the federal government, but rather by reason of their original tribal sovereignty. And so, on first contact, that was like one thing, the interactions with European settlers, they say like tribal nations were recognized as sovereign, like even at first contact. And so they've always had these rights. We've always had these rights. We've had this political relationship with the United States government since, first contact. And then, so basically, tribes have the ability to govern and protect and enhance the safety and well-being of tribal citizens within tribal territory. And so this panel is really focusing on those relationships and that end goal, the safety and well-being of tribal communities. I mean, because what's the point, yeah, I got all through all that. There's just like some things I needed to just get out there, and then to just give you all like a kind of like a really surface level understanding of how policy works in Indian country, because it is, I mean, this takes like semesters like worth of talking and discussing, and I did it in like 3 minutes. Like my tribal sovereignty teacher, Dr. Beck, would be so proud. Just kidding. Anyways, with all that being said, it is my extreme honor and privilege this evening to introduce our illustrious panelists. And I'm gonna do this in alphabetical order, so just putting that out there. And I'm gonna start with Jade Barr. Jade's primary areas of research and outreach focus on Indian country and the impacts of state policies and budget decisions, including that of criminal justice, economic development, and education. She engages with the community to develop and advocate for equitable public policies. Jade is an enrolled member of the Northern Cheyenne Tribal Nation and a Crow descendant. She holds a BA in sociology with an emphasis in inequalities and social justice from the University of Montana. Fun fact, Jade also served a 1-year term in the 66th Montana State Legislature representing House District 50. Jade is currently living in Billings with her 2 cats, Louie and Nanook. Give it up for Jade. And next, I'm going to introduce Gabriella Blatt. Gabriella is a member of the Chippewa Cree tribe growing up on the Rocky Boy Indian Reservation. She is currently based in Washington, D.C., where she works as a legislative assistant in Indian Affairs for U.S. Senator John Tester. In this role, she develops and advances the senator's Native legislative priorities and acts as a liaison between the senator and Native nations across the country. Gabriella graduated in May of 2021 from Yale University with a degree in ethnicity, race, and migration. In her free time, Gabriella can be found making Spotify playlists and reading Native literature. Welcome, Gabriella. And lastly, but certainly not least, Shelley Fyant. Shelley Fyant is a Bitterroot Salish mother of 4 adult sons, grandmother to 7, and great-grandmother to 1. She is the former chairwoman of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribal Council and served on Tribal Council for 8 years. Ms. Fyant currently serves as chair of the State Tribal Economic Development Commission. She obtained an Associate of Arts from Haskell in 1978 and later returned to the University of Montana to earn a business administration degree in 1989. She is an avid Grizz football fan, a gardener, and beater. Her spare time is spent in the mountains with family and working on promoting food sovereignty. Welcome, Shelley. Yeah, and I mean, welcome everyone. If everyone could give a virtual round of applause for our panelists. I mean, maybe even throw in some fire emojis. Like, these guys are awesome. And also go Grizz. So yeah, thank you all for joining us today. I've been really nervous, but also really excited to do this panel. And so yeah, just really glad you all can be here this evening. So yeah, I guess first off, you can go into like further, you can introduce yourself in greater detail. And then in addition to that, I just want to ask, what brings you to this work? What inspired you to get involved in state tribal policy, federal policy, just policy in general? I don't know who wants to start. I could pick someone, or you can.
I can start since alphabetically I'm first. Good evening, everyone. There's really not much more to say about myself. I've lived in Montana all my life, spent summers growing up on the Crow Reservation, and besides Billings, I've only lived in Missoula and Helena. So what brought me to this work was actually, when I served in the legislature, I had gotten to know a little bit more about the work that the Montana Budget and Policy Center did, and the individuals that worked there. And so I really admired them and loved everything they did. And so when my term finished up at the end of 2020, I was kind of ready to check out of politics for a while. So I didn't really follow the legislature in 2021 very closely. Gave myself a break. And then, let's see, some months later, I heard about the job opening for this position. And I thought this job would be perfect for me. This is exactly what I'd want to do. I think it's like a great way to still influence policy, but without having to be a politician, which has probably way too many stresses on its own. And so I applied, and then I was able to make it through the round of interviews. And so here I am today, and I'm just really happy about it, because I get to like focus on just state tribal relations. And as a legislator, you're having to really focus on a lot more of issues and be more general about them. So yeah, here I am today.
Bonjour, everyone. Gabriella Indigenous. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabriella. Again, don't have a lot to add on to about who I am. So I'll just start right off with what brings me to this work. As Danny said, I grew up on the Rocky Reservation. And growing up on the reservation, I got to see firsthand a lot of the results of the policies that I now work with. And I think just like anyone who grows up in the res / in an urban native community knows just how important those policies are. And when I was getting ready to graduate college and enter the job market, I knew that I someday wanted to go back and work on these policies, like the big come back and help your community. But I actually wasn't going to do that for a few years. I had a big corporate job lined up out in Chicago. But the night before I graduated, the senator's chief of staff reached out to me via email and said that they'd be interested in interviewing me for the job. And it was basically a light went off in my head of this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and you'll be able to directly work with tribal communities, which is always something that I thought that you had to be have more experience or be just more have more wisdom to do. So basically had the interview and decided like then and there, like, oh, like I'm not going to Chicago, like I'll be in DC for the next few years. Yeah, that is essentially like why I'm now here.
Hestilu Pesia, good evening, everyone. I'm really thankful to be here this evening and share this time and space with you all. As Danny said, I served on the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribal Council for 8 years, elected by the tribal membership. And then the last 2, I was elected chairwoman by my peers. And so going into that, it was 2020 and I had a 2020 vision. I had a platform that, you know, for my people in our lands that I had thought about for a long time and prayed about. And, you know, we kind of started off doing a strategic planning session. And then, gosh, within 2 months, the coronavirus pandemic hit. So it kind of upended everything that we were doing, but nevertheless, we did accomplish a lot and we worked with the county, which was kind of unheard of in the past, that being Lake County. And so the first year I was elected to council, we were in the Montana State Legislature defending our water compact. Montana's process is that you go through the state first. It's not like that in every state, but in Montana's, that's the process that the compacts must go through the state first and then the federal process. So it was really baptism by fire. We went to the Montana State Legislature and the first round, it did not pass. And I just remember going in there to testify and the balconies were just filled with non-Indians who were just hating on us, you know. And this process was a very open process, you know, the meetings were open to everyone. And in fact, at the time I thought, wow, where did 30 years go? Because that's how long it took to negotiate that. And I kept thinking, oh, I need to go to those meetings. I need to go to those meetings. And before I knew it, you know, I'm on council, I'm trying to defend it. So the other thing that happened my first year on council was CSKT acquired the FERC license for the former Kerr Dam, which was on our property. And this was a project, I guess, that my tribe planned for 30 years. Like we set aside money every year for 30 years to take over the dam. And so the water compact and assuming the dam, I learned pretty quickly that you need to be at the table lest you be on the menu. And so I think that's true of any of these issues that we're going to discuss is, you know, you just need to be there and you need to be educated about the issues. One of the lessons I learned in a previous job was there's always at least 2 sides to an issue, if not more. And, you know, I mean, that's not to say that sometimes you won't encounter just pure racism, but you need to be able to learn enough about the issues to be able to understand the other views. So, you know, back when I was in high school, I kind of encountered that. It was in the 70s and we had a water rights issue going on with the Jim Naaman case, and it had to do with who owned the bed and banks of the Flathead Lake. And growing up in a small town of Arley, Montana, less than 1,000 people, I never really encountered racism. I don't know if it was my age and I was just in grade school or what, but when I moved to Ronan, it was definitely a great divide there. And so I learned, you know, pretty quickly that I needed to understand where other people were coming from. So that's kind of how I got into this. I guess was always advocating for the tribe. You know, just, and then being of mixed blood. My mom is not Native and my dad was Salish. And so a lot of times I was put in positions to be that that ambassador or the advocate or that bridge to help people understand. So that's something I've really embraced my whole life. So thanks.
Cool, thank you. Both Gabriella and Shelley, you brought up some really good points. You know, anyone can engage in policy. You know, you don't have to have a degree or anything. You know, because some of these policies, they're personal. They affect our lives, and you know, we need to be involved. You know, like Shelley said, like we need to be at the table, or we're going to be on the table on the menu. And yeah, so my next question is kind of like, it might be a little hard to answer, but I'm just gonna ask. So right now, what do you consider to be the single most pressing issue facing Indian country right now, and why? Any takers? I know it's kind of like a loaded question.
I'll
Oh,
go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jade.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, there's just a variety of issues, and a lot of them just interconnect and are probably equally as pressing. I figured I would say that voting access and like the redistricting that's happening in Montana, because voting is a fundamental right and it's one that's being infringed upon consistently, and it's also fundamental to our very democracy. So I just like think it's wise to stay abreast of like what's happening with redistricting. You know, we just drew our congressional lines, but now we're doing legislative redistricting. And so, you know, over the next year, they'll be drawing up those plans. And so I figure I would say that it's good if people are going to try to, you know, tune into some of those public meetings and oppose any legislation that comes next session in 2023 that could inhibit our right to vote.
Cool, thank you. That's a really good one. And yeah, so we actually had a workshop on voting rights and, you know, the state of voting rights right now in Montana. And that's actually up on our website right now, a recording if you want to learn more about what the heck is going on in the voting rights realm, because yeah, like Jade said, our voting rights are getting infringed upon. Thank you.
So I thought long and hard about this question, and it is a really difficult one to answer. And I've been really involved in voting rights. I sat in on all the Montana redistricting meetings, and I actually got invited to meet with Vice President Harris and Secretary Holland to discuss voting rights in Indian country back in July of last year. And so, you know, I know that's a really important issue, but one that's really on my heart right now is, you know, because I've been thinking about the people issues and the land issues. And, you know, with people issues, there's healthcare, mental health, addiction, homelessness, jobs, all that. With land, there's, you know, like climate change, protecting our animals, the water, our birds, our fish, you know, the very air that we breathe. And, you know, I always go back to our creation story that, you know, when the animals were getting this world ready for the humans, we were, as human beings, we were given the responsibility to speak for those who can't. And so I think, you know, it's it's no coincidence that the missing and murdered Indigenous relatives crisis and the very state of, you know, climate change crisis that we're in, the biodiversity crisis, the social justice, all those crises together, not to mention the pandemic, you know, they're all connected, they're all related. And I think as, you know, as women, we're keepers of the culture, and we are the very life givers. And so to me that's a very important issue in Indian country right now. So, you know, to protect us as women and as life givers is also parallel to protecting the earth. So that's my answer.
I intentionally went last because I really wanted to see what Jade and Shelly were going to say. And like both issues they mentioned are like happening right now on like the national scale. And like the Kill Bill sirens were just going off in my head. But I'm going to cop out and use my Gen Z answer of just like, I think climate change and like the ecological destruction that we're seeing right now is a large issue that is primarily being ignored and has been being ignored ever since like I remember like being a child. Like these conversations were happening and we're still at the same level of like nothing being done. But in terms of how this relates back to Indian country and like it's very like we think that it's obvious. Just like the image of like polar bears or like rising temperatures that we are bombarded with. But when that we also like look at it at like a deeper scale, the like little things of like us being able to practice like ceremonial fire burning, like when our tribes have to do burn permits or limits because of drought and rising temperatures in the summer, that's an infringement on sovereignty. Our ability to I brought this up a lot last summer specifically, but one of my like biggest memories of being a little kid on the res is going to go pick June berries. I'm not sure what they're called outside of Rocky Boy, but exactly. But when I was asking my mom, like, oh, like, did June berries come in season yet? Like, were there anything? She just like mentioned that nothing grew, like all the berries were dried up. And that's an infringement on our like right to our traditional food. And like when we think of climate change, it's like, again, easy to think about like the big things of like polar bears, but we often forget about like the small things that make our, that our ancestors have practiced for years. And so, yeah, I think that's the single most pressing issue in Indian country, just because like without land, like what do we have? Again, Gen Z, growing up in climate destruction, very fun.
No, those are all really good answers. And actually I didn't think of it. Like I didn't even think of like the berry thing because yeah, it is getting so hard to find berry spots. And you know, everyone's really cheap with like their spots. And it's like, it's climate change. So yeah. Thank you all for sharing. And I know that was like a hard answer. I didn't know how to answer that either because yeah, that is hard. But again, yeah, thank you all for sharing. And so, yeah, with this next question, I really want to kind of dig into y'all's work, you know, your analysis on, you know, policy that you're working on or that you're seeing in your, you know, in your networks. So, yeah, so I know it's like a big question, a loaded question again, but yeah, if you all can just kind of talk a little bit about changes that have happened in the past couple of years to, you know, any really, I'm just gonna give, you know, put it up to you to figure out how you want to do this, but you know, just you know, give us a snapshot of what is going on in regards to policy in your world. Again, I don't know who to start with.
I'll go first this time.
Okay.
So one of the issues that that I've worked on is the missing and murdered Indigenous people. And CSKT was the first tribe to develop a tribal community response plan. And basically that was a result of Operation Lady Justice in the last administration, where they did all these listening sessions and they came out with 4 basic areas, kind of an outline. One was law enforcement, one was victim services, the other was public relations and communications, and then the other one was like community resources. So CSKT had developed a missing and murdered Indigenous peoples work group because of one of our own missing, Jermaine Charlo. And she's the same age as my oldest granddaughter, and her grandma and I have been friends forever. We grew up together. And so, you know, this is a really, really difficult subject. But so we developed that policy in-house. We were the first tribe to develop that plan. And one of the things that happened was we were approached by a gentleman named Rain Bear Stanslas. He came through the reservation and he was doing a documentary on some of the Montana cases. And the documentary that came out is called Somebody's Daughter. And it just highlighted, you know, some of those reasons why people go missing or are murdered. And, you know, there's so many reasons, but, you know, some of them are the drugs, the human trafficking, just the poverty, kids being in foster care, aging out, you know, that's a vulnerable group. There's so many things. So we developed this, or he developed this documentary to educate Congress about Savannah's Act and the Not Invisible Act. So those 2 acts were passed in, I think, 2019. And at the same time, Hannah's Act was passed in Montana, specifically at the state level. Hannah's Act actually created a missing person specialist in Montana, because part of the issue is just the whole jurisdictional nightmare, you know, was the victim on tribal land or not tribal land, was the alleged perpetrator native or not native, you know, it's just so confusing. So anyway, that was Hannah's Act, and then there was the Savannah's Act and the Not Invisible Act. Now in the future, one thing that we're trying to get past is the Reduce, Return, and Recover Act. And that one will specifically address man camps, and it will specifically address the container ships in the Great Lakes region, where women are actually shipped off, and, you know, that's where this trafficking occurs. So, you know, this is it's not just a Montana problem along I-90 or on reservations, although we are one of the main targets. But back to Somebody's Daughter. So that was the documentary regarding the cases in Montana. Well, since then, Rain has made another documentary called Say Her Name, and has to do specifically with Hardin, Montana, Bighorn County being the epicenter of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so we just screened those 2 films last week in Santa Fe, where kind of one thing that came out of that Somebody's Daughter was the next step that we decided to do was in the area of prevention. So letting, I guess, letting our women and children know of the dangers out there and our communities at large, you know. So we developed a curriculum entitled House of the Moon, and it deals with the medicine wheel, the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual aspects of it. So we developed this curriculum around that, and we had a pilot program during the pandemic. Everything we had to do via Zoom. And so last week we got together in Santa Fe, and it was our first in-person gathering since we started this in January of 2020. And so now we're in the next phase of developing the program further out. We had lessons learned, and I guess our end goal is to get a facilitator from every reservation and every reserve in Canada. So that's kind of where my efforts have been most recently. Since I'm not on tribal council anymore, I'm really trying to pick and choose where I devote my energy to. And so this is what it is right now, is missing and murdered Indigenous relatives.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, you touched on something that I just want to talk about really quick. Jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is such a wonky topic because it's so complex. And I'm actually going to share something in the chat. It's actually from the Montana Budget and Policy Center, which is such a great resource, just putting it out there. They do a lot of good work, a lot of good reports, but it's a report on jurisdiction, just to give you all an idea of just like the complexities of it and, you know, how it contributes to MMIP, MMIW. You know, and violence against Indigenous women, girls, relatives is, I'm just gonna say, yeah, it's a direct link to settler colonialism. Every bad thing that happens to us, settler colonialism. I would share a meme, but I don't know if memes are allowed. Anyways, yeah, I put that in the chat. I before we move on, just have to ask, do any of you are any of you like actively working on like anything related to, you know, the violence against Native women and girls? I mean, it's a lot, there's a lot going on, but if any of you want to say anything on that before we move on, because it is an important topic. Also very heartbreaking.
I'm not currently working on anything, but I could speak to just that last legislative session. They passed a bill to establish a missing persons review committee. And at the last state tribal relations interim committee, they talked about kind of some of the issues that they've run into. The point of this committee was to review previous cases where people did turn up, just to try to like interview these people and maybe see if there was some sort of pattern they could catch to prevent things. But they ran into some like constitutional like privacy issues, given that like 80% of them were under the age of 18, so they could not consent. And they were worried about like potential court cases that could end up resulting from sharing their sort of information. There was also some like concerns around like sensitivities of bringing up past traumas, but they are going to continue to like look into a sort of system that would kind of allow for like a paperwork system to allow for consent and work through it. So I know that's where that is right now. I know they extended the Missing Indigenous Task Force and the LINK grant program. For those who don't know, the LINK grant, it was awarded to the Blackfeet Community College in March 2020 to develop this website with a reporting portal. as a way to begin the process of reporting anyone that's missing. So that's all I can say on that.
In my area, very exciting today, it was announced that the bipartisan VAWA reauthorization dropped today, actually. And this is the first time that bipartisanship has come through to reauthorize VAWA in such a long time. And this version of the bill, like fingers crossed, it passes the Senate and House, but it expands the special criminal jurisdiction that tribal courts have to cover non-Native perpetrators of sexual assault and violence, which is just like a huge win for tribal sovereignty and for Native women. It's going to do a lot of cool things. Yes, thank you, SJ, for putting the acronym in the chat. But yeah, keep an eye out on VAWA reauthorization in the next coming months. Very excited about it.
That is really exciting. I didn't know that. So yeah, actually, like VAWA was like my introduction to tribal sovereignty policy stuff back in undergrad. My undergrad is in social work, and it's like in a policy class, and that was actually the policy I focused on. So yeah, that's it's exciting. Anyway, yeah, okay, I will shut up.
I can go next in terms of what's happening in my issue area. I didn't explain this well earlier because ever since starting this job, I have a bad habit of talking in acronyms, as y'all just saw. But as a legislative assistant, I basically monitor legislation that is going through the Senate and House, as well as conduct research and draft potential legislation. And just like in general, give advice on what's happening in Indian country to the senator. And so I started this job last July. Fun fact, my second day on the job, my bosses were like, oh, like you're going to meet with the chairwoman of CSKT. And so Shelly got to see me like when I didn't know where the cafeteria was. But yeah, unlike 90% of the Hill, I didn't come in with any internship experience or anything like that. And so a lot of my time in the job this past year was just like kind of learning how Congress works, how bills are passed. And in my role specifically, I spent a lot of time this past year introducing myself to the tribes of Montana and are learning their priorities and histories with legislation. And so my job, I cover like Indian country overall. And while there are some people in my office, like for example, we have a education legislative assistant and an environmental legislative assistant who like will work on like education in Montana or like environment and like land use in Montana. I do that for Indian country. So like I do like there's nothing that I don't touch in the office essentially. So I'm just kind of like all over the place. But the big thing this past year, and I'm about to sound like a CNN political correspondent, but this was Biden's first year, or when I started, it was Biden's first year, as y'all know. And so that shaped a lot of the legislation that I worked on, namely the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and what was going to be the Build Back Better Act. And so I spent a lot of time learning and advocating for tribal needs in these bills, especially in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which my boss was one of the main senators working on it. And so I got to work very closely with the bill and see how it moved day by day in making sure that what was benefiting tribes stayed in the bill and making sure that Montana's tribal priorities were, again, like surviving as the bill moved through processes and everything. And we got some good stuff for Indian country in this bill, like $3 billion for tribal roads, $2 billion for broadband. And the biggest thing for Montana is the money for the Indian water rights settlements to build out the needed infrastructure to actually pass or to like actually work on the compacts that Shelly was talking about earlier. And this includes the settlement for CSKT, which is the largest in history. I can geek out about Indian water rights settlements all day, so we'll no longer bore you with those. And in Build Back Better, the amount of times that I had to look through that like 4,000 page bill and just like gather what was in it for Indian country and like track the numbers as they were moving. I like have like war zones in my mind thinking about it. As the news will tell you, I'm not sure where the future of that bill lies. So we'll see. It's really just changing day by day. But yeah, so just like the infrastructure bill, as well as introducing myself to tribes and like getting or establishing these relationships, which is a big thing that Senator Tester's office advocated for. We really wanted to make sure that we work closely with tribes and like make sure that their priorities are represented in Congress. And that's one of the, I think, better things about working in this in this job is that like I think like you always see like big like politicians like saying they care about Indian country, but I like after working in this job like genuinely like know that my boss really does care about these issues. And the cool thing is that like 4 states that have less than stellar representatives that work in Congress, they actually come to my boss a lot to like get help on moving their legislation. And so I've had the chance to work with not only just Montana tribes, but tribes throughout the United States. And so like really, I am just thankful that I get to learn every day.
Cool, thanks for sharing. You want to take it from here, Jade?
Oh, yeah, sure. Part of my job is to follow the State Tribal Relations Committee, and they're an interim committee, and they act as a sort of, as a liaison with tribal governments. And so they conduct interim studies. They decide what those studies will be, and then they report their activities and findings to the legislature. They are also capable of proposing legislation, but I figured I'd just kind of touch on maybe what they're following. They've devoted a fair amount of their time to looking at voting access. So, you know, they've recently been able to look at, or were given like a history of voting rights in Indian country. And then they've brought in presentations from the Native American Rights Fund to give a rundown of like the barriers of voting in Indian country. They've also brought in like county perspectives on how that's looking on their side. Another large part of their time they've spent is on the fee to trust conversion. So the committee has been given like a history of allotment and kind of where the fee to trust comes from, why the fee to trust can take so long, and like the financial impacts of that, the tribe's perspectives on like what happens during that process, and then also county perspectives. And this arises out of the bill that was introduced last session by Greg Hertz, that changed the tribal property exemption. So originally when land was being put into the fee to trust, the tribes could have like a 5-year exemption to where they were not taxed, but this changed it to where if the tribes don't end up getting it transferred in 5 years, like say it takes 6 years, but they don't make it in 5 years, they have to pay back any of those taxes that happen. So that has been part of why they are wanting to look at that. I don't know if anything will come out of that. Hopefully something positive. They're also looking at giving time to fixing this previous bill that I did sponsor in the 2019 legislature, and it was to get a updated report on the economic contributions in Indian country, and it was a decennial report. So the intention was to like update the report and fill in the 10-year gap, because the last report was from 2003 to 2009. And so when I introduced it, Department of Commerce came in and helped and thought like, okay, so what should the appropriation be? And first set it at like $170,000 for this report. But then the appropriation committee reduced it down to like $48,000. And that ended up causing a bunch of problems once the bill was passed, and they were trying to work on gathering the information. They had some trouble getting the data from tribes, and COVID hit, so that just delayed a lot more of that being able to happen. But what's important about this report is that it ends up showing just how much of an economic impact that the reservations have in Montana. And the last report, I don't know if we were able to share it already, but it pretty much shows that tribes are bringing in like over $1 billion. And it's important to point that out during the session, because we have to fight like tooth and nail to get any money for any of the programs that we want funded. And we don't get nearly like $1 billion in any sort of funding programs that we're asking for. So, so the committee is going to work on like kind of clearing up some language in that. And then hopefully like getting more money behind it. They did think that it's actually going to cost more, around like $400,000 to complete this report. And then like, hopefully we can set it up to where there's an entity that's familiar with working more with tribes and getting the data, along with like hoping that the tribal colleges could maybe take on the responsibility of collecting that data. I think another important thing worth noting that the committee is going to have presented to them is a history and impacts of the residential boarding schools on tribal communities. And that looks like it's going to be at the next strict meeting in March. And there is not a set date on when that will be. I'll also talk about some of the other policies I'm looking at, which would be broadband in Indian country. There was a national survey that showed that the net result of Montana on average had the slowest internet of all states, and like had roughly half the speed of the national average. And since we are rural, very rural, you know, especially tribal lands being on rural area, they can lack broadband the most. And as with most things, Indian country broadband access has been underfunded. And so last session, the legislature had HB 632, and where they had to divvy up the like $2 billion of ARPA federal funds. And they allotted 275 million of that to go to a broadband grant program. So what's great about that is like tribes can partner with broadband providers and apply for this. And so I've been working to try to like inform tribes on what's happening. And they recently opened up the application period. So hopefully something can come out of that. Let's see. There was like a national grant program called the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, managed by the NTIA, the National Telecommunications Information Administration. And they put $1 billion for tribes to be able to apply for this, but the total amount of requests that that came in for this $1 billion program was around $5 billion. And so like the experts in this area of Indian country think that it's going to be more around like $7 billion just to digitally connect most reservations. So, you know, that $1 billion is already gone. And the infrastructure and jobs bill is going to add like another $2 billion to that. But I mean, those funds are obviously already spoken for. And so I stress the importance of broadband because it's essential to the infrastructure because it interconnects all the other industries. So like schools, businesses, hospitals, like every industry relies on computing, storage, cloud storage, and other digital equipment to like distribute their goods. And in a pandemic that is disproportionately impacting Indian country, like accessing the internet has become vital for maintaining and improving essential things like physical and mental health outcomes, employment rates, school enrollments, and like our social connections. So I thought that was one of the most important things to study. And I could keep going about one more thing, but I think I'll stop there and let us go on.
No, this is great. And thank you for sharing all this information. It's really important. But you mentioned one of my favorite legislators. I don't know if there's Greg Hertz. And I guess like I have a question for Shelly. So, you know, Greg Hertz had it out for y'all over at CSKT along with Lake County commissioners. And I'm just curious where, you know, that bill is like at. Sorry to give you all kind of like some background. So during this last session, there was a bill that would affect the fee to land process and like back taxes. If you could just kind of speak to that a little bit.
Sure. So the problem with our representatives on the Flathead Reservation is they don't represent the natives within the districts. And we've looked during the redistricting process, we looked at all those borders, all those lines to see if there was a way that we could get a majority native district. And I mean, we're still in that process now, like that's the next process after we did the new House representative part of that. But you know, bottom line is there is no communication with the tribe on any of these bills that were brought forward on the fee to trust process. You know, we went there and testified that it's not our, we're not the ones holding it up. We bring it to BIA, you know, we go through that process and we're not holding it up. It's the BIA, it's the process itself. But never have they communicated with us. The same with the bill that Joe Reed brought forward about hunting on fee land within the reservation. That was never communicated to us. And we were like the last to know. And that was during a really uptick in our COVID cases. So I was just only able to testify via Zoom. But luckily Indian country turned out and, you know, had our back for us that time. So that was really good to see. And, you know, I just want to thank the Indian caucus for doing that, you know, that was really overwhelming. So yeah, it's just a lack of communication. And I think that will never stop as long as we have, you know, all these non-Indian representatives and senators. So we do have one district which is a majority Indian district, and it covers from the Blackfeet Reservation down the east side of the Flathead Reservation. And so luckily we've had Marvin Weatherwax and Susan Weber to, go to bat for us in that one, in those two districts. So, we hang on to those as best we can, but it, goes back to communication. So when I became chair, I asked the Lake County Commissioner, the chair of the commission at that time, if we could start meeting. And so we met probably every other week, like every 2 weeks, we would sit down and meet on a Friday and just discuss, what was going on the reservation. It started out, it was kind of a outcropping of our unified command team process with the pandemic. And so we started meeting every other week. And one of the things that the chair of the Lake County Commission said just really opened my eyes was, so as a unified command team for the pandemic, we would meet weekly. And as we were getting ready to open back up, because we were in a shelter in place situation, when we got ready to open back up and go back to work, he said, I've learned a lot from working with the tribe. And he said, one thing I realized is how important your culture is in your decision making. And that got me right here, because I thought, well, yeah, that's always driven our decisions. And he said, we don't have that. And so if you think about that, if your county commissioners don't have a culture or, I guess, elders and youth, to think about, when I go back to my own family, I'm lucky enough to still have my mom, and I have a great granddaughter. So, we have 5 generations in our family, and my family's always had 5 generations on both sides. And so I feel really lucky, very fortunate to have that. And if you don't make your decisions based on your elders and your future generations, and you're just living for today and capitalism and wealth and accumulation, all that kind of thing. Yeah, it just goes back to the settler colonialism that you spoke about, Danny. So, I think improved communication. One thing that I was approached with in the last month was running against Joe Reed on the reservation. And I am just not at that place in my life I can do that. I would love to be at that table, versus being on the menu that I preach, but I'm just not in a place where I can do that right now because of my family obligations. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, totally. And I totally agree about, kind of stepping back from being in it. Because I was approached too, and I'm like, I can't be a legislator. This mouth will get me kicked out. But yeah, so thank you for sharing. So I mean, this past session, if you were involved in it, if you sat in those committee hearings, you heard all of just the garbage, the hate that they spewed, settler, like white supremacy, racism, it was all there. And it's I don't know, it feels kind of scary, like this is our reality, this is our state legislature, and it's a scary place to be sometimes. And so I really do appreciate, you know, those people who are in there every day fighting for tribal nations, tribal communities, because it's not a good place to be sometimes. I mean, after the session, I had to take like, I mean, I still feel like I'm on vacation after that session. Also sorry to my boss who heard me. It's yeah, but I mean, it's like I said, it's our reality. And I mean, again, if we're not at the table, we're on the menu, and it's not changing. And so that's why, you know, we need people to be involved. We need people to, you know, reach out to their senators, their legislators, their representatives, and say, hey, you know, this isn't working. And I mean, even, you know, all the people on like sessions coming up faster than you think. And I mean, if this past year was bad, I mean, not this past year, 2021, like 2023 is going to be really bad. And I don't say that to like scare anyone. I mean, it's the truth. So, but I don't want to focus, I don't want to like end on like something super depressing, because we don't need that. Instead, I want to just kind of end on like positive note. And so my kind of final question to our panelists this evening is, you know, if you had all the money in the world, all the resources, just anything, what like big issue area would you address? Like what, it could be a policy, it could be anything. And I'm just going to go first because I actually have a good answer for this question. And I talk about it all the time to anybody who will listen. I really want a little tiny home village. I always see the posts, like other tribes are doing it. And I want that for my community. Like tiny homes, like housing is such a big issue where I'm from. Gabriella will agree. I mean, you probably everyone should agree, housing on the res is not that great. And so that would be mine. I would just like, everybody gets a tiny home, like you get a tiny home, they get a tiny home, we all get tiny homes. So that's mine.
I'll go. Yeah, when you gave us the question, I gave it some thought, and I was like, oh, well, I would want the decennial bill like funded, but then I was like, no, like let's go big. And this would be me speaking on like my behalf and not like Montana Budget and Policy Center, but you know, I definitely like to see our treaty rights honored and land back, and our institutions in Indian country fully funded. I'd like to see universal healthcare, universal childcare, affordable housing, free community colleges, and reparations made to BIPOC communities.
Jade, save some for the rest of us. I think my big thing is, again, speaking from my own experiences growing up on the reservation and then like leaving it for university, investing in all forms of education for our Native youth and Native college students. I think I would definitely like my dream. For context, I went to school off the reservation in high school just because my school, the school I was going to at the time didn't have a science teacher due to just an absence of teachers in the area. And I just think it's so important, and like I still push on it today when I talk to Native youth, like the importance of getting an education. And like I just like wish that I and like so many other like Native students like didn't have to leave our homes in order to do that. And also just like now, like I wish that there were more opportunities for like Native students and Native youth to learn about like traditional plants or their language and like all the other like traditional forms of knowledge that we like lost, but like now like need a chance to refined, and also just like the importance of tribal colleges and universities, which like have been making amazing strides in language revitalization and also like forestry and conservation programs. So yeah, and I guess as the old saying goes, like feeding the res dogs is my second one. Yeah.
So for me, it's two things. One, and Jade already mentioned land back. You know, if we were to get, you know, even a fraction of our traditional territories back and be able to restore buffalo, restore salmon, then we would have total sovereignty, true sovereignty, because a nation that cannot feed itself is not truly sovereign. And when our traditional food systems were interrupted, that was where it all began, you know, with the reservation era, and, you know, us not being able to go hunt our buffalo and instead being given these awful rations that, um, you know, are still foreign to our systems. You know, I think about my great grandma. She, you know, subsisted on traditional foods and, you know, game and fish. And when they introduced flour and sugar and lard and all that stuff, you know, that's, so I'll just give you an example. My great great grandma lived to be 112, and pretty sure she never had any of those foods or alcohol. My great grandma lived to be 82. My grandma died at 57, and my dad died at 50. And so when you look at that and how our food and our life ways, you know, the foreign foods, and then just the lack of physical activity that came with that, you know, us not going to the east side to go hunt buffalo, us not going to the coast to fish, you know, started by that reservation system. You know, that is what's contributing to our health disparities, and, you know, us living 20 years less than our white counterparts in Montana. So land back definitely is one thing. The other thing is, and it's related to that, is, you know, just our reliance on fossil fuels. You know, it's killing us, it's killing our earth. And when I think about what's going on with, you know, like in Oklahoma, the fracking, and, you know, what happened in North Dakota, you know, with just all that extraction, you know, it's it's killing our earth, and it's, you know, hurting our people as well. And, you know, it's just kind of a breeding ground for missing and murdered Indigenous relatives as well. So yeah, land back, and then getting off of fossil fuels, whatever that takes, if it's renewables, if it's, you know, just us not being so dependent and so relying on capitalism. So, yeah. I just want to give a shout out to Jade and Gabriella for doing the work that you do. You know, I really appreciate the Indian Caucus. I prayed for you guys every day of the session, because you guys were our warriors, you know, every day. And people like, you know, Western Native Voice and Montana Women Vote, ACLU, Montana Budget and Policy Center, all of our allies out there, you really did a lot for Indian country. And then, you know, Gabriella, you at the tester's office, you know, I feel really hopeful seeing you there. So thank you.
Yes, like same, like all that. This is like so empowering. Someone put that in the chat. I'm like, I'm gonna start crying right now. I'll try not to, because that's awkward. But yes, thank you all for sharing all of this. You know, the work the work doesn't end. It's like a thankless job, what you all do. Yeah, and so I guess like right now we have a couple minutes for questions if anyone has questions. And if you all have like anything you want to share, like any kind of events coming up that you want to share with our attendees, or any kind of reports or movies, books, podcasts, like all that, we love that. Well, I do. I don't want to speak for the other people, but yeah. This was great. And thank you all.
Yeah, I'll add, yeah, thank you all too. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here amongst everybody. I'll add that MBPC is they're going to have our annual state tribal symposium this fall, but that is still TBD. And I also wanted to give a plug for the Greater Yellowstone Coalition are partnering with the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes. And they're hosting a free online intertribal gathering on March 1st, 2022. March 1st marks the 150th anniversary of Yellowstone National Park, which was designated in 1872. But as we know, before it was a park, the lands were lived on by a vast array of Indigenous people. And today, dozens of tribes still have ancestral connections to the park. And so this event would really be about elevating tribal communities' voice and envisioning the future of the park. And it looks like the link was shared in the chat. Thank you.
Cool, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I forgot to mention earlier when I was going off on settler colonialism, like I think yesterday was actually like the anniversary of the Dawes Act. Boo. I think it's like 130 years. And they're still trying to take our land. Like, geez, don't you take enough? No, but yeah, if there's any attendees that are rich and white and have some land, give it back. If you have friends that are rich and have land, tell them to give it back.
What was that line on Reservation Dogs? They want it all back?
Oh yeah.
That was great. I just want to say, and this is just a local thing in Missoula, but we all I guess are suffering, our mental health, our lack of being social, et cetera, because of the pandemic. Well, there's a all Indigenous comedy lineup on February 17th in Missoula, Montana at the Zootown Arts Community Center. And I don't know if y'all know Lenny Peppers. Her daughter or her mom is Ray Peppers, former representative. And my son Thomas is a new stand-up comedian. And there's a few others, Michael Beers and Marsh Sandoval. Those are the ones I know. But yeah, I would just encourage you all to attend that if you're local in Missoula, and just have some good laughs. We need more laughs in our life.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we survive, like Native people. Like, I mean, all those really crappy things are happening, but I mean, at least I can make a joke about it, which I think I do too much of, but can you do? But yeah, alrighty. Well, again, I guess thank you all for joining us for our last panel of our 16th annual Women's Policy Leadership Institute. So much gratitude and appreciation for our panelists this evening, just doing the work, really important work. Again, like I said before, we ask you to complete our evaluation complete that and you will be entered to win a Visa gift card or a signed copy of What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat, which was written by our keynote. I expect glowing reviews on this panel. Just kidding. Yeah, we really do appreciate those evals because, like I said, they help us improve. And yeah, I feel like there's like something I should add, but I don't have anything.
Can I make a closing statement very quickly? I didn't have anything to like advertise because I don't live in Montana for the time being. Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming and listening to us. This was I'm very honored to be surrounded by the Native woman that I got to talk to today. Y'all are just like such awesome role models. And also wanted to go back to a statement that I made earlier of how like when I accepted this job, I didn't think that like I was old enough or like had enough experience to get into the world of just like politics. But like now realizing that like I always like had viewed politics as like, oh, I can like start making change when like I'm on council or like running as for like Congress in Montana. But like doing this job and also just like reaching out to like friends that are back on the reservation, the like biggest like changes that we can make for our reservation come in like the small everyday things, whether that's like learning our language or like calling out like your creepy friends for talking to girls in high school. Like those really are like the big things that make a difference. And yeah, you're gonna tell that I studied ethnic studies in college, but our reses are only as beautiful as we make them, and there is always a better future for Montana and for our tribes.
Yes, I like want to clap. I'm gonna clap. But you brought up something that we've been kind of talking about like a little bit here at Montana Women Vote, and that's taking this institute to tribal communities. Like, someone at the high school in Rocky Boy reached out and was like, can you bring your institute here? Because, high school students, we were all high school students. Online things aren't really the greatest ways to present information sometimes. And so, yeah, it's just something that we've been kind of talking about. I'm hoping that, our panelists today will join us once we do that. But yeah, and I mean, all this would be tailored to tribal communities, but yeah. Oh yeah, and if y'all need to register to vote, let us know. We do voter registration stuff. I guess that's my ask. Like, make sure you're registered to vote at your current address. We don't have same day voter election day anymore. So get that taken care of sooner rather than later.
Thank you, everyone.